Hi, I'm Max Keiser, and this is the Keiser Report. This, of course, is a pig. We're going to be talking about pigs today. And before we get any further into the show, let me introduce Stacy Herbert once again. Stacy, welcome back.
Max, a pig is in my headline. The pigs are flying. Whoops, the euro is already slipping. So, of course, the pigs being Portugal, Italy, Ireland, Greece, and Spain. And they were all soaring on this $960 billion alleged bailout of Europe.
That's right. That happened just recently. The pigs. Here's some more pigs. I got plenty of pigs here. Here's a flying pig. Here's Italy's pig. Woo! There goes the Italian pig. Here's the Greek pig. Flying pig. Whoa!
But the fact is, the pigs were rescued by more pigs. Everybody's bankrupt. All the people rescuing Europe are in themselves bankrupt.
That's right.
Of the 750 billion euro package, 440 billion is in loans or guarantees from Eurozone countries
who are
bankrupt.
That's right.
60 billion euros comes from the EU budget, and 250 billion euros comes from the IMF, the International Monetary.
Oh, here's the IMF. Here's Tim Geithner. Woo!
Well, actually, April of 2009, the IMF issued 250 billion euros in new SDRs. So they are printing their own currency on top of all these other national currencies which have been printing.
Woo! Yeah, that's the new special drawing rights, which is the new global currency that'll take the place of the U.S. dollar and give centralized command and control economic levers to a bunch of bureaucrats hiding behind dark exchanges somewhere in the bowels of Wall Street in the city of London. More flying pigs! Whoa!
So, and it's also been very interesting reading the financial press and who is quoted in the financial press to see what the response was to the $960 billion bailout. And one article, they quote the Italian bank Unicredit, which had huge exposure to all these bad debts. This is shock and awe, part 2 and in 3D. This is truly overwhelming force and should be more than sufficient to stabilize markets in the near term, prevent panic, and contain the risk of contagion.
The near term in this case meaning 5 minutes.
Analysts at Crédit Agricole, I think the bank with the biggest exposure to Greece, the significance of these measures should not be underestimated. Now, this is the cheeky part. However, the problem is that the package may amount to a get-out-of-jail-free card for European governments. Oh, it wasn't a get-out-of-jail-free card for Crédit Agricole.
Well, it's absurd because, as you point out, they're bailing out debt with more debt. So, again, it gets back to what we've talked about on this show, which is the Norman Bates style of economic theory, that you're actually just committing the same crimes but dressed up like your mother.
Then I'm going to bring myself into this discussion. Quote of the morning. This is from clusterstock.com. I hear that some bond vigilantes were murdered in cold blood last night.
Who said that?
That was from Monday morning when I had responded to the bailout. I said this because of a quote from Cantor Fitzgerald, who are bond traders. What will be bought if distressed bonds? Which nation? Surely there will be disagreements over what nation's bonds will be acquired, in what size and when. Where on the curve? Will this create a speculator's playground by suddenly going long all of the pigs' bonds? So the bond vigilantes are not happy.
No, the bond vigilantes got carried out on a stretcher. They lost to the Keynesians. The Keynesians are winning. But in the end, ultimately, the gold vigilantes will be the supremo numero winner of all.
Well, of course, the bond vigilantes, one of the sayings that came in about them in the past was never bet against the Fed. And the Fed is the one that they bet against in this situation because the U.S. Federal Reserve is the one that basically is underwriting, I believe, the 440 billion euros in alleged borrowing that is going on from the Eurozone countries.
Is that right?
Well, Fed opens line of credit to Europe.
So the Fed is backstopping this bailout?
The Federal Reserve late Sunday opened a program to ship U.S. dollars to Europe in a move to head off a broader financial crisis on the continent. Other central banks, including the Bank of Canada, the Bank of England, the European Central Bank, the Swiss National Bank, and the Bank of Japan, also are involved in the dollar swap effort.
Oh, here's my copy of the Constitution, Ben Bernanke. They've got no authority to do that. They've got no authority to ship money, American taxpayer money, to Europe. What is this, the Marshall Plan Part 2? Who authorized this? This is tyranny. Bernanke, Geithner, tyrants.
The article points out the Fed's balance sheet ballooned to $2.3 trillion, more than double where it stood before the crisis struck. We all know this. This is before Sunday night. Now, the program reopened on Sunday, the article says, will expand the Fed's balance sheet, economists say. However, the program poses little risk to the Fed because the arrangements are with other central banks, these economists say.
Right, so Al Capone is doing a deal with Babyface Nelson. But, you know, I love this term when they talk about the Fed's balance sheet, as if there's some equilibrium in this somewhere. There is none. It's pure quantitative fraud.
Well, they're also echoing the assertions of the former Citigroup chairman in the 80s who said that why they were lending to Mexico and Latin America and Africa so recklessly was because, he said, nations don't go bust.
Ah, yes, Walter Wriston.
Oh,
that's right, of Citigroup. He was before Chuck Prince. There was Walter Wriston, who blew Citibank's balance sheet, lending to South America because countries never go bust. Walter, that was one of the first Citibank bailouts, of course, back in the 80s.
That's correct. So those are famous last words. Who will bail out the Fed? At the end of the day, that's going to be the last guy standing. Who will be able to bail them out? We hope we find some planet out there that might rescue us.
Yes, a planet made entirely of gold.
Obviously, no banks are allowed to lose, right?
No.
So this is going to take me on to my next headline. Out of the Eurozone, over to America. Unbelievable. Goldman has 0 trading loss days in last quarter.
I really enjoy the way you're reporting on this, I must say.
Well, apparently, Goldman has just reported how much they earned. And every single day of the last quarter, ending March 31st, they made money. They never once, in all of their trading days, did they lose money. Not even a penny.
Hello, Bernie Madoff.
That's correct, and we just recently reported on this in our last Thursday's episode about the very fact that Goldman Sachs is very similar in their market-making ability and capacity as the arguments that Bernie Madoff used.
Yeah, let's get serious for a second. When Bernie Madoff tried to defend his illegal activities, he kept talking about he's a market maker, he's a market maker. When Lloyd Blankfein goes on TV trying to defend his fraudulent behavior, he keeps saying market maker, market maker. The result's the same, the crime is the same, the penalty should be the same. Blankfein should be sitting next to Bernie Madoff in a federal penitentiary for the next 150 years.
Well, Zero Hedge puts it this way. Goldman is now the market, or in keeping with modern market reality, Goldman is the house. It controls the casino and always wins.
Well, that's true. There is a tremendous crossover, Stacy Herbert. The technology in the casino industry using behavioral economics and allowing people to just almost win at their bets and to get them hooked psychologically into the casino model of draining one's assets. A lot of that technology and a lot of the players in that industry now work on Wall Street. And they've made these markets, the S&P futures contracts, the New York Stock Exchange, the CME, the box office futures contracts, the carbon trading index. All of these things are now designed in ways to hook people in psychologically so they become addicted. And then all that money goes from the masses to a few bankers on Wall Street.
But speaking of markets, this takes me to another headline regarding the market collapse last week. And you're mentioned in these articles, so I'm going to ask you for your expert opinion on this. Manchurian candidate market. This is how Barry Ritholtz puts this headline, high-frequency terrorism, how the big banks and Federal Reserve maintain their death grip over the United States.
Yes. Well,
high-frequency terrorism, Max Keiser, what is it?
Last week, the market plunged 1,000 points. This was in conjunction with a bill in Washington to try to break up the too-big-to-fail banks.
That's correct.
Now, what these banks are able to do is they're able to use their high-frequency trading programs, their trading bots, to get markets moving in one direction or another. They don't have to control the entire market. All they need to do is change the direction. Once they change the direction, then you've got these hundreds of thousands of day traders who are led by Jim Cramer, CNBC, and others, to basically commit the crime for Goldman Sachs, commit the crime for JP Morgan, because they jump on and they perpetuate the trend, because they're all momentum traders. So it's like that movie, Manchurian Candidate. Remember, they brainwashed the guy to go to Washington, and then his mother, Angela Lansbury, when she showed him the Queen of Diamonds, the brainwashing kicked in, and he went and assassinated the president. Here, all they need to do on CNBC is say that the technical patterns are showing a certain pattern, and all these day traders immediately, unconsciously start going in the same direction that the program traders want them to go into. And then when there's a huge 1,000-point crash, of course, Goldman Sachs will say it was the market. So they're playing day traders as the patsies.
The collapse in the Dow Jones by 1,000 points, it was a very short, brief, violent thing. And who stepped in at that moment to buy? The big buyer was JP Morgan, so they made quite a lot of money. And they're in my headline now talking about these rigged markets. Whoa! New York Post says federal agents have launched civil and criminal probes into JP Morgan for silver manipulation. So federal agents have apparently launched parallel criminal and civil probes of JP Morgan Chase and its trading activities in the precious metals markets. The regulators are pulling all trading tickets on JP Morgan's precious metal moves on all the exchanges, both the London Bullion Market, which is the physical market in London, and the New York Mercantile Exchange, which is the paper market in New York.
Silver is very important because if you can manipulate the price of silver, you, by association, can manipulate the price of gold, and therefore you can manipulate the price of the dollar, and therefore you can manipulate the price of all currencies that trade against the dollar. Remember, since the Bretton Woods Agreement, essentially all currencies trade against the dollar. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. And so if you can manipulate silver, gold, dollar, currencies, that's what JP Morgan does. They do it for the government, and they do it for themselves, and they make a lot of money, but they don't make it in an honest way or using any skill. They make the same money like Al Capone makes money. All right, Stacy Herbert, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
Thank you, Max.
Don't go away. We're coming right back with much more.
Igal Vega, Sergeant of the Israeli Defense Forces. During his service, scotched a street fight. Efraim Khana, Colonel of the Chilean Armed Forces, participated in keeping down a military revolt. Camila Mejia, Sergeant of the U.S. Army, tried to become an American by taking part in the Iraqi War. Ranks and reasons differ, but one thing brings them together. Once, they disobeyed.
Welcome back to the Keiser Report. Time now to welcome to the show Damon Vrabel. He's a former officer in the U.S. Army who became a businessman before becoming a journalist and a post-neoclassical economic philosopher. Damon, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Max.
What are your thoughts on the alleged or actual $960 billion bailout for Europe?
Yeah, I'm actually a post-neoclassical economic philosopher because this is a great example of what's wrong with neoclassical economics. The idea that people and governments give over all their wealth and their sovereignty to banking institutions so that people like Lloyd Blankfein and Jamie Dimon have more power than their governments. This idea is going to end up bringing most nations to the state where Greece is today. And once it reaches the bigger developed countries like France and Germany and even the United States, we're going to rue the day that we ever let our governments, our towns, counties, and states, the basis of a republic, be taken over by a financial empire system.
Okay, now let me just fill in some of the gaps, historically speaking, as I understand them. Okay, neoclassical economics refers to the economics that started during the Enlightenment with Adam Smith, correct?
Well, with Adam Smith, you actually had a model of an actual free market with real money that people could use to just engage in exchange and transactions with people. Today, we don't have that. We have debt-based money, and neoclassical economics ignores this. It just assumes it away and doesn't address this fact that we don't have any of these unless our governments are in debt.
Okay, well, neoclassical economics gave way to, at some point, let's say during the early 1970s when the U.S. dropped the gold standard, to neoliberalism and a system of transactionalization where transactions were more important than the underlying economics. And it's this transactionalization that has led to the current state of misallocation of assets and the disequilibrium and the power that we see holding sway on Wall Street over the rest of the population. Is that a fair characterization?
Yes, and that's what most people miss is the power differential. That's the problem. The model of the economic system we have today delivers unbridled leverage, basically, financial leverage, and that's an ability to gain power and control over underlying institutions, which used to be just companies, but today it's people and governments. And so the financial institutions are using their power and control to basically govern our governments.
Tell us a little bit about how the IMF fits into this.
The IMF is another created institution, a manufactured institution created by these people that are engaging in the types of strategic thought I'm talking about. It's designed to capture governments and gain the power and control over governments by putting them in even more and more debt than the individual central banks do. And so this is an institution that's being used to centralize the world. It's a huge centripetal force. The bond market is a centripetal force that constantly centralizes wealth and power.
Well, centripetal force, of course, is the opposite of the forces we see at the amusement park, the centrifugal force that forces everyone to the exterior of the spinning wheel. This is centripetal, which is the force forcing everything toward the center.
Right. And since they control governments, they have an ability to make sure that it's always centripetal. So the market is usually balanced between centripetal and centrifugal force, like the universe is. The universe is in constant tug of war between those two primary forces, but the bond market is able to create a centripetal force, and then by harnessing or hijacking governments, it prevents centrifugal forces from taking over. We're seeing that in Greece right now.
Okay. Just to put this in economic terms, what you're calling centripetal forces, you could also say is deflation. In other words, if Greece blows up and it forces more power to the center, and the center is increasingly more controlled by a few group of guys who are acting as global stewards of the economy for their own good and at the detriment of the rest.
Correct.
Okay.
So,
now, where does a special drawing right fit in? Where does the IMF and their recent bailout, where did they get the money? How does it relate to special drawing rights? And is a special drawing right going to replace the U.S. dollar as a world reserve currency? And what implications does this have for the U.S. and the countries around the world?
It's hard to know what specifically they're going to do with the SDR and if it's going to replace the dollar, if it's going to be some other form of global currency that they come up with. But right now, the SDR is used as sort of a super leveraged international currency that can be used to impose power and control over the governments so that you can force the government to maintain centripetal power and keep the people submitted under the control of the IMF, or basically the bond market. The IMF is a Trump organization that is able to come in when the bond market when the natural market forces would vary and maybe fall or maybe allow centrifugal forces to take over. The IMF is able to come in, trump that natural force, and apply a centripetal force to keep centralized power.
Okay, so the SDR then, to put this into context, let's say, and relate it to an Enron. During the Enron scandal, we know that Enron had many offshore accounts. They had special purpose vehicles, and they had all kinds of unaccounted for offshore accounts, and they were constantly playing hide the parcel with their debt. And as they were able to push debt off the balance sheet, they could therefore use their non-indebted balance sheet to borrow more. use that to pay themselves huge bonuses. If they had incurred any more debt, they'd simply put that more off the balance sheet, and it created this money machine for the insiders. You're saying on a global level, the U.S. dollar is encumbered right now with trillions of debt all over the world. Now it's even taking on the debts of Europe. So at some point, to push all that debt into the background, you simply create a special drawing right, and you say, oh, well, all the debt that was associated with the dollar is now part of the dark universe of dark exchanges, and we don't worry about it because interest rates are almost zero, and we're just going to extend and pretend forever, and now we're just going to focus on the SDR, and this is a clean, spanking new global currency that's unencumbered by debt, and we're going to use this to leverage the economy even more, and of course, leveraging the global economy even more means more debt slavery.
Exactly. I mean, that's a beautiful summary, and it's bringing us to just more indebted slavery and to the point of an eventual collapse that's going to bring a global depression, I think, that's going to put us in so much pain that we're going to be willing to accept whatever they come up with to replace the current model of nation states with a single integrated system.
Right. So the end game, what is the end game? I've got my little version of the end game, but since I'm interviewing you, and you are a philosopher, what is the end game?
Well, the ultimate end game might be very different. It might be more hopeful. If we get into sort of eschatological hope, the sort of things that religions teach us.
Okay, you're using a big word there, buddy. Okay, what now? You even out lexiconed me on that one. What is it? Ecclesiastical arbitrage?
Well, I'm just saying that the end game that these people are planning is not the ultimate end game. I think there will be a future beyond what these people are planning. But the end game for these people is, and I'll avoid the long word then, is to bring us under a single globally controlled system. And it's a wild card whether they're going to be able to pull it off, because we see in Greece people trying to engage centrifugal forces and get some of their power back. But that's their plan, is to keep this momentum going towards a globally integrated system where one central banking network controls all nations, including the ones that aren't currently under the Anglo usury-based banking system, which is the Muslim countries. I think it's no accident that we're attacking them now, because it's the last religion that has maintained its stand against usury.
So basically, for those who would say that there's a conspiracy theory here, all I would say, and you would agree here, is just look at the size and accumulation of the debt and how the debt is hidden. Just look at that one number, and you can pretty well see the entire development of the end game as you see it, which is a new SDR global currency, which is just going to be essentially foisted upon the population in a way that you can only, in any good conscience, call debt slavery.
Right.
So is there any fighting back at all, Damon Vrabel? Is there any action that could be taken as an individual?
Well, I think the key is going to be, there's a lot of individual actions we could take, like preparing ourselves for the collapse of the financial or corporate system and being more self-sustainable in local communities and being a little more independent of the corporate system. But we're going to have to apply our political power to the government. This is where I disagree with Peter Schiff. A guy like Peter Schiff is sort of stuck in the Austrian framework that hasn't existed for 30 to 50 years, where there's a divide between public and private sector. Today, all money in the private sector comes from public sector debt. So it's a Wall Street empire system controlling both public and private sectors. And so by attacking government, he's attacking the only hope we really have of changing this system, because a lot of blood, sweat, and tears was spilt over establishing our government system. So it must be important. We need a republic form of government in order to, according to a lot of philosophers, have a good balance between human rights and power. We need to return to that system. We put a lot of effort into that. So by attacking that, Peter Schiff is really killing our only hope. We need the government to return to a republic. We need it to serve the people, rather than transferring trillions in wealth from the people up to the financial empire system. After the crash of 2008, they could have let Wall Street fail, and that would have pushed us back. That would have pushed power back down to state levels. It would have allowed centrifugal forces to take an effect. And it would have been painful. But that would have been the solution, because then the government, the states would become relevant again, and the D.C. government would serve the interests of the people and the states. But as long as they work for the financial empire system, it's the private sector, the financial private sector, that is the problem here. And I hope guys like Peter can update their thinking on that and really start speaking more specifically about what's going on.
All right, well, we're going to have to cut it off there. Damon Vrabel, thanks so much for being on the Keiser Report.
All right, thank you, Max.
We're definitely going to have Damon on again soon, and I'm going to bring my thesaurus next time. And anyway, I got to wrap it up. This is going to be this edition of the Keiser Report. If you want to send me an email, please do so at keiserreport@rttv.ru. I want to thank my guests, Stacy Herbert and Damon Vrabel. Until next time, this is Max Keiser saying bye, y'all.